Get that feeling, like some teams just work. They're in sync, they're humming along, but then others, it's like trying to herd cats. We've all been there.
It's true, isn't it?
And today, we are diving deep into the why, thanks to some seriously cool research fresh from the 26th International Dependency and Structure Modeling Conference.
DSM.
Exactly. And trust me, this isn't your typical dry academic paper. This one's got some real aha moments about building teams that actually click. So get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about teamwork.
Well, what really struck me about this particular piece of research is how it really zones in on something that often gets missed. It's this sort of invisible web of connections. Those connections, they really make or break a team's success.
Okay, so unpack that a little bit for us. What are these invisible connections?
It all comes down to this, right? Typically, we fixate on the who does what. The tasks, the deadlines, who's got the ball, making sure things move smoothly. And that's all essential, of course. But equally vital, and this is where it gets juicy, is the knowledge that flows between team members. The way expertise is shared and built upon. This research calls this knowledge interdependency.
So it's that moment, like you're banging your head against a wall on a problem, and then a colleague shares just one little insight, and suddenly, boom, it all clicks into place.
Precisely. It's like that spark, It's when you bring different minds together and they ignite something bigger than themselves. And it's not always a big dramatic thing either. Sometimes it's subtle, like in those brainstorming sessions where everyone just gets on a roll, ideas are bouncing around. That free-flowing exchange, that's knowledge interdependency at its finest.
And I'm guessing this knowledge flow, as you called it, it's often invisible, precisely because it's not as tangible as, say, checking tasks off a to-do list.
You hit the nail on the head. See, we can easily track tasks getting completed, boxes ticked, but the real magic, that exchange of expertise, those light bulb moments, they often happen organically. They're harder to quantify, but the gold. And honestly, this is where I see a lot of companies, they kind of miss the mark with how they structure their teams.
Because they're so focused on the who does what, they totally miss the who's learning from whom.
Exactly. The traditional approach, you often see companies using this tool. It's called the Design Structure Matrix, DSM for short. Right. But the idea is you map out who depends on whom for what tasks. And the goal there is to try to streamline the workflow as much as possible, minimize delays, those bottlenecks, miscommunications, all that jazz. And while that's super important, this research, what it argues is that this approach, it's only looking at half the equation.
It's like fine-tuning a factory for maximum speed and efficiency, which sounds great on paper, right? But then you forget to actually train your workers on the newest, most innovative techniques. So, yeah, you might be fast, but are you really maximizing everyone's skills? Are you pushing the boundaries of what's possible?
That is a brilliant analogy, and you've hit on the clutter of it. That's the gap this research is trying to bridge. They're offering a new way of thinking about it, a new approach. How do we design teams that are not only efficient, but optimized for this knowledge sharing? How do we create environments where expertise is nurtured and grows? And it all begins with a very simple question.
Ooh, okay. Lay it on us. What's the magic question?
The question is, how much does your organization truly value knowledge sharing? And I don't just mean giving it lip service, right? I mean really, truly baking it into the DNA of how your teams are built and how they function.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Got it.
Okay, so you've had this heart-to-heart with yourself, maybe with the higher-ups about priorities. What's the next step on this knowledge-powered team-building journey?
Next, you've got to get a clear picture of how both types of interdependency are playing out within your team. Remember, it's not just who relies on whom to get the work done, but also that crucial who's learning from whom aspect. And honestly, you might be surprised by the connections you find when you start digging.
So you're talking about shining a light on those informal mentorships, those hidden knowledge hubs that don't always show up on the official org chart, right?
Yeah, exactly, those hidden gems. And to capture those, you might use surveys. The paper actually gives some great examples of this observations, just being present and seeing how people interact naturally. Sometimes even good old-fashioned conversations can reveal a lot. Just asking your team, hey, who do you go to when you need help with X? The goal here is to create two separate maps. You've got your workflow map showing how tasks are interconnected, and then you've got your knowledge sharing map, which is all about those more organic flows of expertise.
Okay, so I'm picturing these two distinct maps, two potential blueprints for how my team could be structured. Now, this is where I get a little stuck. How do you reconcile those two viewpoints? Which one do you prioritize?
And that's where it gets really interesting. The researchers, they propose a sort of thought experiment. Imagine you only cared about knowledge sharing and building that expertise. You'd group people based solely on that map, right? Now, flip the script. Pretend for a moment that all that matters is pure workflow efficiency. How would you structure your team then?
Okay, so I've got these two idealized versions of my team swirling around. One's optimized for knowledge flow, the other's a well oiled machine for getting things done. Now what? Do I just pick my favorite and call it a day?
Not quite. And this is where the researchers get really clever. They actually developed this mathematical tool, a way to find that happy middle ground. It helps you land on a team structure that might not be perfect for either goal in isolation, but strikes that critical balance between workflow and knowledge sharing.
Hold on, a mathematical tool. Don't lose me here. My brain tends to shut down at algorithm.
No worries, it's not as intimidating as it sounds. Think of it like a graph, all right? You've got workflow efficiency on one axis, knowledge sharing on the other. Each point on that graph represents a different potential team structure. What this tool does is help you pinpoint the sweet spot on that graph, the team configuration that gives you a good dose of both.
Okay, so it's about finding that sweet spot where you're not sacrificing speed for knowledge or vice versa, right? It's about maximizing both. But let's get out of the theoretical weeds here for a second. How does this actually play out in the real world?
I'm glad you asked. They actually walk us through a really cool case study in the paper. And it's a manufacturing plant, of all things, which I thought was surprisingly relatable.
A manufacturing plant, really? That does sound surprisingly relatable. Tell me more. So they took this whole knowledge mapping thing to a real factory floor. I love that. So what they find, what happened?
Well, it's a really interesting example because at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, right? You've got your 9 workers, each with their very specific role. And their initial team structure was all about that classic assembly line efficiency. Who makes what? Who hands it off to whom? The drill. But then when they overlaid this new framework, when they mapped out not just the workflow, but the knowledge flow as well, things got kind of interesting.
Okay, so spill the beans. What did they discover?
They discovered that in their quest for this perfectly efficient workflow, they had unintentionally grouped some people together who barely shared any knowledge at all. Can you imagine? Like sitting right next to someone for 8 hours a day, but not really tapping into each other's expertise. What a missed opportunity.
It's like they're so laser focused on their own little piece of the puzzle that they haven't even stopped to look at the bigger picture.
Precisely. And here's the kicker. By simply shifting a few roles around, using that knowledge sharing map as their guide, they saw a massive improvement. And not just in how much they were producing, but the quality of their work went up, and even their job satisfaction increased. It really drives home the point that this isn't just some fluffy nice to have. Optimizing for knowledge flow, it has a real tangible impact on a company's success.
So it's not about throwing efficiency out the window. It's about finding that equilibrium, that sweet spot, where you're productive and firing on all cylinders, but you're also constantly learning and growing together as a team. It's about creating an environment where those aha moments, those sparks of insight, they're not just happy accidents, they're happening all the time.
Absolutely. And the best part is, this isn't just limited to manufacturing. This applies across so many different fields. Think
Hmm.
about software development, marketing, design, any field where knowledge equals power, this is where it's at.
It's about harnessing that collective brain power. So for our listeners who are ready to, get their hands dirty and rethink how their own teams are structured, where do they even start?
It all starts with a conversation. Talk to your team. Talk to your manager. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo a little bit. Ask those questions. Could we be structured in a way that really maximizes our collective knowledge, a way that helps all of us learn and grow?
It's about shifting that mindset, right?
Mm.
From, well, this is how we've always done it, to how can we do this even better? And this research really gives you the tools and the vocabulary to have those conversations.
100%. Because in today's world, things are moving so fast. It's the teams that can learn together. Those are the ones that are going to come out on top.
So true. And with that in mind, we're going to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. This research, it focused on those more immediate benefits of optimizing for both workflow and knowledge flow, right? But what happens when you zoom out a bit? How might factoring in long-term growth, that potential for innovation, how might that impact how we build teams in the future? Something to think about as you embark on your own deep dive into rethinking teamwork.